a guest speaker is Joe Kerhin.
Yep, Kerhin.
Kerhin. Okay, perfect. And I appreciate you coming out today and being able to talk to the class just a little bit about your job, and so students kind of see what STEM looks like outside the classroom, obviously. So we do as much as we can in the class, and I know it's not as much as usual this year, but I'd like them to see and hear kind of what you do, like, maybe on a daily basis. And I have a list of questions here. So if you want to go ahead and just kind of run through kind of the questions we went through, go ahead and feel free to elaborate.
Yeah, sounds good. So hello, everyone. My name is Joe Kerhin. My current role is my job title is senior staff engineer, but my kind of position is I'm a project engineer. So I am kind of the project lead on two projects at the company we have right now. My company has a very generic name of SciTech Incorporated. It doesn't get a lot more generic than that, but we're a engineering firm that does both hardware engineering and software engineering. So I work on the software side, but we have folks at the company who are building. We've got a whole lab downstairs building radiometers and doing the actual hardware stuff. So it's a neat company to work at because we have kind of the combination of the software stuff, and then we have the expertise as well for the physical side of things as well. So one of the questions was, where did I go to school? I actually went to school at Brea Olinda High School, so not too far away. And then after that, I went to the Air Force Academy, was where I went to college. And so I did a degree. I got a bachelor's of science of electrical engineering. And so that's what I did. And then after that, I went into the Air Force, and I was an engineer in the Air Force. And the Air Force is kind of weird in that an engineer in the Air Force is not really the same thing as, an engineer at most normal companies. And so what I actually wound up doing was pretty much, it was a job where they had it was a very specialty type of thing where they didn't have, it's not big enough for them to have a career field where they said, we're going to train a number of people, but it was a technical track. And so they said, what, we'll just throw engineers at it and they'll be able to figure it out. And so that was my role at the Air Force. And then when I got out of the Air Force, I wound up applying and getting hired at the company I work for now at SciTech, doing largely the same work as basically as a contractor rather than working in the Air Force. And so that's kind of where I went. I went from Air Force engineering to corporate engineering, I suppose. And I got when I was in the Air Force, I was in Dayton, Ohio. I'm not from Ohio. We have no family in Ohio. Didn't really want to stay in Ohio, and our company was headquartered in Princeton, New Jersey. And at one point, we had somebody from the company ask if they were complaining that it's hard. They were looking for people, and I said, "Hey, would you move me out there?" And so we moved out to Princeton, New Jersey, and that's where we've lived for the past almost 5 years now. And so we really enjoy it out here, and so that's what I'm doing now. So one of the questions we had was kind of, how does your job relate to STEM? I mean, it's almost even in the duty title itself. My job as an engineer, I get paid to be an engineer. And so that's, I think that's about as directly related to engineering as it gets, as the big E in engineering. And another question you guys had was kind of like, how did you know you wanted to go into STEM? How did you know that was a field you'd be interested in? And I think for me, it was, something that I knew from a rather young age. Both my dad and my mom both had engineering degrees. And as a kid, I was really into Legos and to the, sometimes dismay of my parents. I was always interested in, taking things apart and figuring out how they go back together, figuring out how they work. And usually being able to figure out how to put them back together and return them to a working state. But as a kid, you don't always know how to put it back together. And so I think that was one of the things that it's something that for me, it's learning how things work is just a really interesting thing for me. I just find that to be a very interesting passion. That's how I learn best. That's how I like to learn things, is to kind of, dig down and figure out how it is that a given thing works. And then, if I want to have something that does, something slightly different than what it already does, let's take it apart, figure out how it's doing what it does, and where do I fit in, and how do I make it do what I want it to do. And so that's kind of how I thought that I'd want to get into engineering. And so when I was in college, I figured, I was interested in electronics, and I found it interesting. And so I was figured that the career track that I'd want to go, I wanted to be an electrical engineer. And so that's what I did for my degree. And I think by the end, I was in the final semester of my senior year, and I realized, wait a minute, I like electrical engineering. I like it enough, but I was working on a group project, working with classmates who were in different majors, and I was working with the computer engineers, and I realized, wait a minute, electrical engineering is a lot about building circuits and designing applications and filters, and doing the electronic side of things. And the people who are actually building the robots and telling it what to do, that's the computer engineers. They're the ones telling things how to do things, how to react. And I was like, that's what I should have done. And so I had that realization, and I realized, well, I was already about to graduate with an electrical engineering degree. So I had a, electrical engineering degree with a, computer science specialty, because I was able to take a class or two, but I didn't have, a full computer science background. And so then, as I mentioned, the Air Force is kind of a weird thing where, just because you had a degree in something, or just because you did something, that doesn't mean you get to pick what you do. You do what the Air Force needs. And so I wound up doing something that was not electrical engineering, and it wasn't software engineering either. But it was interesting enough to me. And so when I was getting out of the Air Force, I had the chance again to kind of decide, what is it that I want to do? Did I want to start applying to, companies that just did electrical engineering? Is that something that I wanted to do? I hadn't had hands-on experience since I graduated. So is that something I wanted to kind of get back into that market? Or did I want to kind of lean into, what I had learned on the job? And I went that way, and I've really enjoyed it. I've found that, from what I've, done and what I've worked on, I find computers to be a lot more, maybe not enjoyable to work with. Maybe that's not the right word, but it works a lot better with, kind of how I think about things, and how I, what I think my strengths are. And so that's been what I've leaned into now. And so the projects that I'm leading right now don't have any aspect of hardware behind it. So I haven't really used the core fundamentals of my electrical engineering degree a whole lot since I graduated. But learning the how to learn things, how to approach systems, that is kind of a core thing, and I think that's core throughout engineering as a whole. A lot of my coworkers, even though we're working on software projects, a good chunk of my coworkers have, a mechanical engineering degree, or one of our lead analysts is a biomechanical engineer. So she'd previously worked doing prostheses, so like prosthetic legs and prosthetic arms, designing those. And now she's working assessing the output of computer stuff. And so it's a lot more of, how do you work with the process, and how do you work with other people? And I think that's something that is, I think that can kind of get overlooked sometimes, is more than just the core math and the core science, is the process of it, is the how do you build things, how do you design things, what's your process for making sure what you're doing is. And so that's something that I think was I've really picked up on that as I've been in the workforce for longer. Is it's a lot more than your pure knowledge, so much as how well you are with working with other folks. So one thing that one question you had was kind of like, what does a typical day look like for me? And so right now I'm in kind of more of a management role than I typically was. And so it's probably a little different than a lot of my coworkers. And so a lot of my day is kind of, I'll come in the morning and I'll go through my emails. And I'll go through my big giant checklist of everything that needs to get done. And I will just sit there and I'll spend, half hour every morning, just, mapping out the day and saying, all right, these meetings I have, and these are the things that have to get done. And so it's then, how do I find, you know who needs help, and how do I help them out? And so every day we have a meeting, a team-wide meeting, where people kind of do just a quick check-in to share what are they working on, what are they going to be working on next, and then what kind of blockers do they have. And so every day I learn what everyone on my team is, what they're stuck on, what's keeping them from getting their work done. And so I kind of use that as an opportunity, and I use my role to kind of go find out and how to unblock them and let them do the work that they are able to do. And so a lot of what I bring to the table is being able to know, okay, so maybe this person has a relatively new hire and they're working on a task, and they're stuck in an area, and I say, oh, you know what, that's an area that people get stuck in before. Let me go talk to this person over here who's worked on that same task and they've fixed it. Or sometimes it's something where knowing that if people are working together and making sure that, wait a minute, I see you're working on something new, I think you're doing a great job, but we already have something that does that. I need you to go talk to this person over here, and I need you two to work together and make sure that you're not replicating the same functionality in a slightly different way. And so I think that's a lot of what I think the big aspect of engineering is the knowing when you work, once a project gets beyond something very small that just you're working on yourself, once it has more than a handful of people, you really need to kind of be able to take a step back and say, what actually needs to get done, and what can get done, what order do things have to get done. If I'm working on something over here, can I build this thing over here before somebody else gets theirs done? And being able to have that whole stepping back, and then and being able to work with other people. And I think that's something that I definitely want to, and that's one of the questions was what's the challenges? And really the challenge is being able to know what all is going on, because it's once you have more than a handful of people, you'll never truly know everything that every person is working on, and you'll never be an expert at everything. And so a lot of it is being able to know who's the expert at their areas, and being able to know who to go to when you have a question, who to put people in touch with, and how to get people to work together. And I've really found that to be something that's, for me, has been really, I would rather have somebody who's a little bit less excellent at one specific area, but is really good at communicating where they're at, and really good at noticing and saying, hey, I'm stuck here, can I have a little bit of help? Or, oh, let me reach out to this person, I think they might know. Than somebody who's really, really, really good at a technical task, but when they get stuck, just refuses to let go and just insists on just solving it themselves, even if it's something that that you put in a ton of effort solving something, only to find that there's a solution somewhere else. And so I think that's definitely a big thing, for a big challenge is being able to recognize, have the and it takes courage, basically have the courage to say, I'm stuck, I don't know where I'm at, let me go find somebody else who knows more, let me bring that up, and let me seek help when I'm stuck. Because as somebody who manages people, I really would much prefer that people come to me with problems than to just sit there and just grind on them for days at a time, when I could have helped them unblock it, and when I could have helped them with the problem a couple days before. And so that's been something that has been And that's not something that, that I don't think that comes naturally to people. And so I think that's definitely something that has been a challenging aspect to the job, is, being able to work with people and being able to give them kind of the security and the basically the being able to take away the threat and give them the comfort to know that, like, that it's not a failure on the individual person. Just because you're failing at a task doesn't mean you're a failure. Sometimes there's things that are blocking you that are completely out of your control. And so it's up to, the higher level people to figure out what are the things that are truly beyond the control. And if it's something that, is possible to solve, figure out how to help them out, get them paired up with somebody who's more senior and have them have some training. Send somebody to a training course and, get them familiar with the new technology. And so that's been, a lot of the work that I've been leading in the past year or so. And I think that's been a really interesting thing to do. And then the last question that I had was kind of what recommendation would I give to people looking to get into engineering or looking to get into even specifically software engineering? Is really, I think it comes down to a lot of that, is, being able to know what you're good at, and then being able to seek help, and, being able to identify people who can help you out when you're stuck in an area. And I think that kind of thing, being able to work with other people is a huge thing that I think it feels very forced when you're in group projects and in high school, group projects in college. It feels miserable because you're sitting there and you say, why do I have to work with all these other people? I could do this faster if I did it by myself. Or, why I have to coordinate with all these people, and, this person wants to do it this way and that person wants to do it that way. And that's the entirety of what engineering is in the real world, is being able to work with a group of people. And sometimes, there's things where a lot of the aspects of my job, when I have folks working on something, I can watch them and I could do their task a lot faster myself, but then I couldn't do my other tasks. And so it's, being able to identify, you're doing work here, and, we know this is good, and we're going to invest the time in having people get trained up in that. And so I think that's a big recommendation, is being able to, know your skills, being able to work with other people. And I think the other big thing is kind of what I mentioned previously, is I thought I wanted to be an electrical engineer. And after doing electrical engineering, I found that's not really my passion. And so I think I really wish that I had spent, more time earlier, with, extracurricular activities, or, talking with other people in other majors, and, learning about what other things there are around. Just because you think you're really interested in something, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, at least have some exposure to other things, or try other things out, or have different to just, explore different things and see what you're interested in. Because I think and then I found that real common, is that just because you went and did one thing for one time doesn't mean that's what you'll be working on for the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think you brought up a couple of good points that I wanted to just retouch on. Is especially for our students here in engineering, one thing is, you said about group work, and we always make teams, when we build things, robotics and all kinds of stuff. And I know some students don't like it, but I think it's really good experience to end up, just like you said, working with other people. It's pretty much like you said, it's a requirement, right, for engineering.
Yeah.
I mean, especially nowadays, things are so complex. There's usually not a task where you just sit in a room by yourself and make something.
Yeah, and actually, that's one thing I didn't mention. That is probably the most challenging aspect of my job, is, when we're working on, we have, a piece of software. When we're working on it, when we're building it ourselves in our lab, that's relatively it's a little complicated, but it's manageable. But then when we take it and we need to go put it, in somebody else's environment, somebody else owns the lab, and then we have to connect to somebody else's program. Then we have to connect to another person's program. And so we have to meet with, 4 or 5 different people, and, 4 or 5 different projects, and being able to communicate and being able to define, what does this interface mean, and what do you mean when you're going to send us this? How does that work? And being able to identify what the components are and work with people to resolve the issues when they inevitably arise. That's an enormous, that is the perpetual challenge of engineering. I agree 100%.
Okay. And there was one other point, but before I say it, if anybody does, if they had something in their head, and I would love to ask Mr. Kerhin about something. You can just write it in the chat, or if you're being shy about it and you want to do it more anonymously, you can send a private question to Mr. Oliver or myself, and we'll ask it for you. The other thing was, I think it was a big point for all our students here. We have one class of freshmen, one class of sophomores right now, and is you brought up a point where you said you need to I don't know, overcome or be brave and ask when you need help, kind of thing. And I thought that was a good point because uh you know you're not you're not, what do we call it, you haven't lost, or you haven't quit yet if you're asking questions. That's part of the whole process, in other words, you haven't failed until you quit, you know so you just go, I haven't succeeded yet, but move forward. And that's why I always try to tell my students that failure doesn't occur because, oh, I don't understand this. That's just part of the process. Nobody understands everything. That's why we're and that's why we're doing that. I mean, if it was all easy, we wouldn't need engineers, right?
Yeah, and for sure. And I think that's it's something that is, I think it's hard for me as well. I mean, being able to recognize, just because it's something that I think if I worked on this for another 2 or 3 days, I'd eventually be able to push through and figure it out. But maybe I don't actually have 2 or 3 days to solve this, and I have to step back and I have to find somebody else, and I have to say, look, I can't handle this. I need somebody who's going to be who's more skilled at this, who's more familiar with this. This has to be done in a specific amount of time. I need somebody else to help me out with that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Someone else might be more knowledgeable, and it may not even be that. It may just be that they're coming from a different perspective, and that you're just stuck in the same loop trying to solve this one problem, and you can't think further than that. And someone else kind of sees something from a different angle and helps you out. I mean, sometimes it's just as simple as that. So, yeah, that's a good point. Mr. Oliver, did you get any questions? I don't have any myself over here.
No, I don't have any as well.
Okay. Well, Mr. Kerhin, I really appreciate all your time and
Thank you.
your information
Thank you so
that
much.
you give us. Yeah.
Yeah, glad to help.
All right. Thank you very much, and thanks again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great one.
Okay. Have a good day.
Bye.